the basic question is this. Let's review the Shaila. So the Rambam says, the Rambam rules that as follows, that there were three components with three matters that the Yidden, the Jewish people, entered into the covenant. And the three things are Milah, Tvilah, and Korban. Right? Circumcision, immersion, and a Korban. And he brings the various psukim, and which we talked about last week. The various sources in the Torah, some more explicit than others. So what's the Korban of the Ger? So the Korban of the Ger is, he has to bring several sacrifices, and then he is, nowadays, that's the specific Korban is a burnt offering and a peace offering that he brings to complete his or her Geirut process. The Rambam then says as follows, quote, that was the laws of forbidden relations, chapter 13, we summarized halachas 1 to 4. In halacha 5, he says, and nowadays that there's no korban, so you need milah and tvilah. Again, milah, circumcision, tvilah, immersion. When the Beis HaMikdash shall be built, he'll bring his korban. Now, just that quote alone, the conclusion is he's a complete, or she a complete convert. Nowadays, even despite the lack of the korban, but when the Beis HaMikdash is built, then they're obligated to bring a korban. So to explain this, what happened to the third component? What about korban? These were three components that were required for Jews to enter the covenant then. Why is bringing the korban nowadays not critical? In other words, you would think that since there's no Beis HaMikdash, there are many laws that don't apply, and we would think also that the laws of conversion don't apply, and non-Jew cannot convert because there's no Beis HaMikdash. That we would think so. The Rambam says no. The conversion is complete when the Beis HaMikdash is brought. The person brings the korban, but the question is why? Why is this third thing optional, as it were, or not critical? So the Rogatchover writes as follows. He writes what appears to be a rather strange statement. He says that the korban is only with respect to sacrifices. In other words, he's basically saying, as we will go on to say, that even when the Beis HaMikdash stood, and the Ger did not yet bring his korban, but he did the other two, as well accepting, of course, the yoke of Torah, that's a given, he's still a Ger. But it's only with respect to eating sanctified food that he is not considered Jewish. We have to understand this. You have to understand what it means that in some respect you are, and in some respect you're not. If you're absolutely are, then you absolutely are. So how is that what does this mean? So we're going to explain this. This is what we started to explain. Because as he said, the basic question is, it's true that there's no sacrificial food today. But how do we still say that he's still completely Jewish? And in fact, elsewhere, the same Rogatchover writes that with respect to sacrificial food, he's considered non-Jewish, ben noyach. So how is this possible? In one respect, ben noyach, not Jewish, and on the other hand, fully Jewish. And the question becomes stronger considering that from the time of the Beis HaMikdash, there were many, many converts, and amongst them, Gedolei Yisrael. So how could we say that, but when it comes to eating sacrificial food, korbanos, food from a korban, they're like a ben noyach, even though there isn't the Beis HaMikdash, but that reality remains. How could this be? And we also pointed out the question that became stronger. The question became stronger because we told the story of the letter which the Rambam writes to Rabbi Avadia Hager, who had written to him with respect to certain prayers that can he say my forefathers, not my forefathers, since it's not his forefathers, he's a convert. And Rambam writes to him in extraordinary words that your virtue is greater than naturally born Jews, You are connected directly to Hashem himself. That's where your Jewishness is bequeathed, as it were, directly from Hashem. And then he brings a proof that in halacha, he rules, the Rambam, the time of the Beis HaMikdash, with respect to his question about prayer, he says that a ger who brought fruit, bikurim, so there's a whole, it's called a vidoy, a whole confession, a whole thanksgiving that the Jew declares in the Beis HaMikdash, and there he thanks God for giving the land that you swore to our forefathers. So the Rambam says, rules, like the opinion that says a convert does say it, because who's his forefather? His forefather is Avram. Now, Avram is the forefather of everyone, including him. The relevance of this halacha is that the Rambam brings this to a law concerning the time of the Beis HaMikdash in answering Rabbi Avadji Hager's question. So this makes our question, we're completely puzzled now. Here the Rambam brings something from the time of the Beis HaMikdash, a law which doesn't apply nowadays, but he uses it to say, therefore you should say the words our forefathers Aviseinu. And yet, if he lived in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, didn't bring his korban, he's like a ben doyach, says the Rogatchover, non-Jewish. It's a completely inherent contradiction. So we are puzzled. The bottom line is, how is it possible? This is the simple, to summarize the question. How is it possible that there are three components? The conversion, we only have two, and yet the conversion is okay. 100%, notwithstanding the fact that there's no korban, no offering. That's the basic question. We're now page 190, chapter 3. Yossi, you have it?
Yeah.
Gimel. Now, to answer the question, the Rebbe introduces an interesting halachic concept, which is fascinating, and we will now explain it to you. So let's begin our journey. The Chayir would appear, chapter 3. Nitin Hayala Hasbe, we could explain. A little bit different than the Rogatchover. And that is as follows. The reason that a convert can't, if the Beis HaMikdash would stand, cannot bring sacrificial food. Till he brings his korban, mishum ar Yehuda Ravia oleh. This is because of the following phenomenon, and that is, in translation, a lion is crouching on the matter. You hear? That's what it means. Arya is, it's Aramaic. Arya, a lion, who the Ravia, which crouches, Allah on the matter. What does this halachic term mean? It means, and I'll illustrate it. The matter, the thing is a thing. It's valid. But you can't approach it because there's something preventing you from touching it. That's the lion. It's a metaphor. The lion is crouching on something. It doesn't mean, and you don't have it. It doesn't mean the thing doesn't exist. It says you don't have it because something is preventing you from getting it. Now, what's the halakhic ramification of this? So the Gemara brings, I want to read them to you, or rather share them with you, two examples of this, fascinating examples, and I hope you'll grasp it, of we consider the entity valid even though in practical terms we cannot actually engage it. Two examples in Allah. Okay, here's the story. This is Masechta Shavuos. You with me? So earth is something which is not fitting for consumption. It's not food. Therefore what? So when it comes to consumption, what's considered eating in halacha? Eating, as opposed to tasting or snacking. The Torah prohibits eating non-kosher food. Talking from the Torah perspective, the prohibition is only if it's how much? Yossi, what do you want to say? A kazayis, which is the size, the volume of an olive. Our sages determined that is the minimum amount of food required to satisfy a meal. If you eat a kazayis a bed, you have to bench many halachas. Thousands of halachas to revolve around the measurement of food, the measurements in general. Okay, now earth is not food. Fact number one. Nevela. Nevela is a kosher animal that died not through shchita. Is it food? It's food. Are you allowed to eat it? No. Not kosher, but it's food. Okay, we're clear? Now, right there already is this principle of a lion crouching on it. It is food. We're not saying it's not food. The Torah says you can't eat it. We're not denying the fact the Torah doesn't say it's not food. Except this food you may not eat. So therefore, what's the practical ramification? If somebody made a shvur, this is now a new law. The law is a new subject that, as you all know, it's forbidden to transgress one's oath. If you take an oath, you've got to fulfill it. So somebody swore, this is an interesting case, he's not going to eat earth. The question is, how much earth does he have to eat to violate his oath? And he gets, there's consequences for that. If he's warned, etc., he gets malchus, he gets stripes, lashes. There's no witnesses, so he's accountable in heaven. So how much of the earth does he have to eat in order to be liable? So the halacha is that what? That since earth is not food, therefore the smallest amount of earth that he eats, he's liable. He doesn't eat a kazayas, there's a volume of an olive of earth, because that volume of an olive only applies to food. But on the other hand, if someone swore he's not going to eat nevela, he's not going to eat nevela, even though he's not going to eat it anyway, but he made such an oath. So therefore, he's only going to be liable if he ate how much? The size of an olive. Why? Because it's food. It's just that the Torah prohibits it. But the designation of food still applies. So he's only liable to transgress if the meat is the size of an olive. So that is a demonstration of a principle of the matter is a matter. You may not approach it for a separate reason. The lion crouching on it. But it doesn't take away the designation of the non-kosher food as being food, and therefore, if he ate less than an olive, he's not liable. Whereas earth, he would be, if he made that similar oath. Clear? Yes? Thumbs up, thumbs down, and nod. Okay, good. Now another illustration, a fascinating one. Another illustration of this principle. It's Masechta Eiduvin. The laws of Eiduvin, of course, deal with the laws of Eiduv. So here's the story. A courtyard, even though from the Torah perspective, it's closed in, it's considered a private domain, but the sages forbade, as we all know, carrying from the houses, the various homes that open to a common courtyard on Shabbos, unless an Eiduv is made. The same is true of a city. In order for that's an Eiduv on a larger scale. So in order to be able, it's the same principle, in order to be able to carry in this area, so it's not enough just to have a wall around. That's the first thing an Eiduv needs, is you have to have the whole area enclosed, but that still wouldn't allow it to carry. What's done is, here in Montreal, you have more than one Eiduv. I mean, Chabad doesn't use it because it relies on many lenient opinions. And the other reasons we don't use it, we don't use an Eiduv either, because we don't want, first, if it breaks by mistake, people don't know, they'll be carrying on Shabbos, and also other considerations you could forget. You go to another city, there's no Eiduv, you're so used to carrying. In your town, you'll carry there as well, and there's no Eiduv. It's somewhat of a controversial subject, whether an Eiduv is a good thing, not a good thing. There's a solution to put up an Eiduv, not tell anybody. So therefore, people who are carrying are not transgressing, but then that won't help the people who want to carry and observe Shabbos, etc. But anyway, that's a whole subject. But I'm just telling you that making in the Eidov is not just enough to have literally the area enclosed, and that's how this is done with telephone wires are used and ropes and poles. And again, the Alter Rebbe is very strict about what's considered a enclosure, and the Eidovim that are used in cities throughout the world does not qualify in general. But the other thing that's required is there has to be one place, usually it's a shul, where a box of matzah, food, which is going to last, is placed there. And like everybody has a share in this matzah. It's a whole ritual. Someone takes it, give it to somebody else, like we do Erev Tavshilan and Erev Yom Tov. And this person accepts it on behalf of the entire community. That's now, there's a common eating place, in other words. And everybody, not just a common eating place, but everybody's sharing in this common food. That transforms the entire courtyard or city or town into a singular, unites everybody as a singular domain. Huh?
Like Erev Chatzeres.
This we're talking Erev Chatzeres. So we're talking about Erev Chatzeres. It's not we're talking. I'm just saying Erev Tavshilin is the same principle in a different how to cook. Because I'm just saying it's similar in that all people share in this food, allowing them to cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. We're not talking about cooking; it's a completely different subject. It's carrying, but this principle of common food is they share in common.
We had to do it for the minyan. All the backyards.
Exactly, all your backyards that you share, you want people to carry into a common area. You had to make a side had to be enclosed. You had to have a common food. You use the box of matzah, yeah.
Piece of matzah.
Piece of matzah.
Yeah,
Yes, it's it. Okay, so with this background, another fascinating example of this principle of Ar Yehud Ravia Oleh. And what is that? So here you have two courtyards separated by a wall. Now, if there would be a door opening, no problem. They could be considered one courtyard, and therefore they could all unite with one article of food in one of the domains, and everybody can carry between the courtyards. So one Eruv for both courtyards. But there's a wall. There's a wall. So normally with a wall that completely divides the two, completely halachically, they would need two, each one to carry into their own courtyard would need their own Eruv, and they certainly can't carry from one courtyard to the other. But there's a tree. And the tree is right by the wall, and it serves as a ladder, and that's used during the week as a ladder. The people go from one courtyard to the other. So, the halacha, there's an opinion in halacha that says like this. This tree is considered an opening. It's considered an opening, which therefore unites the two courtyards. And therefore, you can use one Eruv for both, and they can carry from one courtyard to the other. It's Shabbos. And on Shabbos, you're not allowed to use a tree, not even allowed to lean on a tree, for fear you'll break off a branch. And you certainly can't use it. It doesn't change the halacha. Shabbos is the lion that's crouching on the tree that says you can't use this today. But is it still a tree/ladder? It's a tree/ladder, like the principle before. Torah says you can't eat unslaughtered meat. That's the lion crouching. But is it food? It's food. So the nevela is a designation of food. And therefore to transgress your oath, you have to eat a kazayas. Here too, a very different law, but the same principle, fascinating principle. If there's a tree which is used against the wall as a natural ladder, even though today on Shabbos we can't, we still consider it to be an opening, a door, and a one unified courtyard. Shabbos is the lion crouching on the tree that says you can't touch it today. But the tree is still a tree, the ladder is still a ladder. Are we clear? Now, how does this apply to us? We're going to see. But are you with me, friends? Yeah, this is now you learned the principle in halacha of Ar Yehud Ravi Aleh. Yeah? I want to see your hands up if we got the idea. A nod, a wink, a vunk. Okay, thank you. Now, so now we're going to look inside the principle, look inside the text. So here, in our case of the ger, so the fact that he didn't bring a korban yet is like the lion. Like a lion, but doesn't still validate his reality. Kloimer, meaning to say, Isir achilas kodshim, the fact that he cannot eat sacrificial food if the Beis Hamikdash stood. It's not because he, as a ger, lacks conversion. He's a complete ger with milah, tefillah, circumcision and immersion, accepting the yoke of heaven. It's a separate thing. His obligation to bring a korban, and it that prevents him from eating kodshim. In other words, you see the principle here. Really, he should be able to eat kodshim. He's a full Jew, can eat sacrificial food. What's holding him back is you have to bring your korban first. That's the lion crouching on that area of mitzvahs. Just like the Shabbos doesn't allow the tree to be used, and the Torah says you can't eat that meat. The meat is meat, the ladder is a ladder. Here too, the ger is a ger. This third component's got nothing to do with him being a ger. The first two things, we'll explain at the end why this is so. The end will find out why it's different. But first he's giving it the halachic classification. The first two components of circumcision and immersion that make you a ger. Finished. What do you need kodshim for? What do you have to bring your korban for? In order to be able to eat sacrificial food, which in essence you could, because you're Jewish, you have to bring your korban. That's what the korban is. It's not part of the actual process. Now, why is it different? We'll see at the end of the talk. But we have to go further, clearer. Lefizet comes out. Adrab, on the contrary. Yuvnu divrei Rambam will understand the words of the Rambam. The Rambam says, in describing a convert who didn't bring his korban yet, even the time of the Beis Hamikdash, even then, he says, Shadayin lainase kekoshrei Yisrael. In italics, do you see it there? He hasn't yet become kekoshrei. The word kosher, friends, means fitting, like a fitting Jew. Kosher meloshen liyas muksher. So he's saying he is Jewish, but not fit for what? To eat. Not fit to be able to eat sacrificial food till he brings his korban. But he's still Jewish. That's there in the words of the Rambam. Kloima, kol oid loy hevi ageres korbonai. We're talking about Beis Hamikdash now. The ger didn't bring his korban. Ari al afayosi sal gomor. He's absolutely Jewish, but still ein hu mukshel achilas kodshim. He's not fitting yet. He's Jewish, but a Jew not fit yet to eat sacrificial food. An example, the matter is similar to another halacha. Another halacha, and that which we live. Those who learn one parak a day are learning this now in Rambam. Another example, and that is Shemilas Bonov of a person's Erev Pesach. And every Jew is obligated to bring and partake. We can appoint the shliach, but you have to partake of the korban Pesach. The Torah says that you, the individual, cannot bring if you didn't circumcise your children or your avodim, your servants. So Mainas as a Yehudi, this prevents a Jew from shechting the korban and eating it. Now he's still Jewish, 100%. And he's still obligated, but there's a lion crouching. You didn't circumcise your children. In such a case, obviously, it's clear he remains who he is. As a Jew, right? Only Jews can eat the korban Pesach. This Jew is not allowed to because he's not Jewish. He's Jewish, but what? There's a lion crouching on the korban Pesach. And in this case, you didn't circumcise. You have in your household children or over the age of 8 days or servants. In that case, we didn't yet circumcise. That prevents you. They are the lion crouching on the korban Pesach, forbidding you from slaughtering or eating it. That doesn't take away from the dream. That's another illustration. And according to this, we understand the letter very simply that Rambam wrote to the great sage Rabbi Avadia Hager, Italian convert. She'enu pochos misha b'nei Yisrael. He's no less than any Jew. Lahipech, on the contrary, as the Rambam writes to him. Others were born into it, and you came to it by choice. Even though she'enu muta b'achilas kodshim at she'yoves karbonai. There's something he can't do. If the Beis Hamikdash descended right now, you couldn't right away eat sacrificial food until you brought your korban. It doesn't detract from what he is. The fact that you can't eat sacrificial food, that's a separate thing. It's the lion. What's the lion? You got to bring your korban first. It's like the lion crouching on it. It's not a problem in the person himself. I might give another example, a very simple example for this principle. It may not be 100% true, but it's like this. You have money they give you a lot of money in your vault, but you forgot the combination. You forgot the combination. So is it your money? Are you worth this amount? Yeah, but you can't use it because there's the lion. You forgot, or you don't have the key. You lost the key. But it doesn't change the fact of your worth, your essential worth, even though you cannot physically access it. It's not a very good example, but it kind of illustrates the point. However, we still need explanation. But in light of all of the above, we still have some words of the Rambam, the language of the Rambam, that still hasn't been satisfactorily explained. Yesh lahov v'nislosh Rambam, have to understand the words of the Rambam. Shekarbonoi ikvay liyos ger komur. He says his lacking of bringing a korban prevents him from being a complete convert. And that's why he doesn't need kodshim, sacrificial food. So from these words, this implies if he didn't bring a korban, his conversion is not complete. So the words of the Rambam here need to be understood. What does this mean? The explanation is as follows. The Shoinish al Rambam, when the Rambam says the words Shekarbonoi ikvoi or akvoi, I think, Liyos ger komor, that bringing his korban or not bringing it prevents him from being a complete ger. Interestingly, why doesn't the Rambam say that in the affirmative as opposed to the negative? He says his sacrifice prevents him from being a complete korban. Just say his sacrifice makes him a complete ger. I didn't say it right. Now it says his sacrifice prevents him from being a complete ger, holds him back. Why say it in the negative? Say it in the affirmative. His sacrifice makes him a complete ger. Bringing it, not, he says the lack of offering it prevents him from being a complete ger. Say it in the affirmative. Bringing it makes you a complete ger. So by putting it this way, rather than that the sacrifice converts him, or another way to say it is ois ger. God makes him a complete ger. Could blame a similar affirmative language. He doesn't put it that way. Why? Because he doesn't mean to say that bringing the korban actually makes him a complete ger. Kloimer, as if to say, that through circumcision and immersion, he's only Jewish for everything else minus sacrifice. In order to be fully Jewish with respect to sacrificial food, it's created through the korban. He doesn't mean to say that. he meant that, he would say it in the affirmative. Ella, he puts it in the negative. He says, She'i avoras a korban, not bringing it, ma'akeves holds him back, miliyas l'inyan zeh, from being in this respect ger gomer. Why? The ain't dvar of soisim is the ain't dvar elo soisim is dvar, and he's not contradicting his other words. But he's going to began a whole discussion with b'shleisha dvarim nichnas yisol the bris. That it's three things you enter the covenant. The milah tvila korban. And the Rambam said, "V'chem the doiris to all generations. The kol is the bris took in time of the Beis Hamikdash. Tzarich milah utvila v'tzaris korban. You need the three things. All three are critical. That doesn't contradict. Why not? In order to enter the covenant, you only need two. Inyan hamachnis. This is what enters the covenant. And then there's things which remove barriers. And then there's things which remove barriers. They're two separate things. What brings you in and what removes the barrier. And what removes the barrier, like the example we brought before, you're going, a Jew, he didn't circumcise his son or his servant, he can't bring the Korban Pesach. That doesn't take away from his Jewishness. Like we see, if you want to bring something into a house, a very simple example. You got to remove barriers. It's like the key, I said. This is the example. And stops you from entering. But that's just removing a barrier. But removing the barrier is not part of the actual entrance. Likewise, in our case, let's look at the Rambam's words, page 192. Likewise, in our case, the Rambam says, with three things the Jews entered into the covenant. And then again, he stresses when it comes to the convert, the Kornis Liberis, he doesn't say, here's a critical distinction, friend, very subtle. He says, with three things they entered, as opposed to three things enter him. You see the difference? With three things they entered. Two were the way you go in, and one removed the barrier. He doesn't say three things entered him. You see the difference? Because one of them is not the way you enter, it's just removing a barrier. That's the korban. He doesn't say three things brought the Jewish people into the covenant. And he doesn't say that again needs three things lachnisai to bring him in. He just says they enter in actual fact with three things. But two of them were the entry and one of them was removing a barrier. The actual end of the day, bottom line, how they got into the covenant was three things. Milah tvila korban. Indeed, circumcision, immersion, and the korban, the sacrifice. However, but there's two things that are happening here. There's two things that brought them in, and one thing just simply there's something in the way. Let's get it out of the way. That's the third thing, which is not bringing them in, it's just removing a barrier. As in the words of the Rebbe, what is the process of entering? It's milot tvila, circumcision and immersion. And then there's a third thing. Oh, there's something crouching at the door. You can't eat kodshim yet. You're Jewish, but you can't eat kodshim. You got to bring your korban. Hasoras ari, you're removing the lion. Which prevents the entry in terms of sacrifices. How do you move that to the korban? Well, and therefore, nowadays, you don't have to remove this barrier because there's nowhere to go there. There's no korbanos. So we don't have to worry about this barrier. There's nothing holding him back in his conversion because there's no door. It needs to open because there is no door. There's no Beis Hamikdash. The fichach in other words, like this. He's 100% a convert. Here's the Beis Hamikdash. You need a key to get in. But if there's no Beis Hamikdash, you need the key. Very simply. If there's no Beis Hamikdash, you have to give the ger the key. There's not. All it is a key to go there. He's Jewish. So the key is not a problem if there's no door, there's no place to go in. There's no Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, he becomes a complete ger, like the Rosh said, and now we're validating it. He's missing nothing. Now the Rebbe says, I'm ready to take a thing, and next we go even deeper. And therefore, now in exile, friends, we'll explain all of this deeper next week, God willing, or like the spiritual, the chassidus behind it all. Nowadays, after becoming a complete ger, it's forever. Forever. But doing with halacha, like similar to the halacha, listen to this. If a convert converts properly, and then they abandon, they stop observing. It's too late. Chal olav din Yisrael, he's a Jew, imki solomumba, he's a Jew that is an apostate Jew maybe, but still a Jew. There's a way to get that goes back to his even idolatrous practices. But if he observed or she observed Yiddishkeit sincerely, even if he or her fell sway to Yetzer Hara and external influences, does not change their Jewishness. Now, therefore, applying this principle to what we just said now. The Rebbe says now an incredible chidush, an incredible novel insight. Since a convert today is 100% ger, and you don't need the key to the Beis Hamikdash because there is no Beis Hamikdash. When the Beis Hamikdash is built, when the Beis Hamikdash is built very soon in our days today, he could eat or she could eat a sacrificial food even before they bring the korban. Because he's already a complete gomer, kosher, he's like all fitting Jews.
It's not, there's no argument there.
Huh?
There's no line.
So there's no line anymore. Huh?
That since there's no Beis Hamikdash, then if there's a Beis Hamikdash there, he has to bring it.
So listen, since there is a line that prevents,
but there's no more the Beis Hamikdash.
But now you understand. Since there's a line that prevents, and now the person converted, that is 100%. I would have brought my korban right away. There's no Beis Hamikdash, so I couldn't bring it. So the lion preventing me from bringing my korban because there's no Beis Hamikdash, therefore we consider it as if what? Everything is done completely. It's like you did bring your korban. I would. What could I do? You didn't send Mashiach. Not my fault. Send Mashiach, and I'll bring it. So the fact that there isn't the Beis Hamikdash now makes the convert 100%. So when the Beis Hamikdash is built, you don't have to bring the korban. You became 100% Jewish now. You can bring your korban right away. Of course, the person should, but that is extra voluntary. B'mila macheres, in other words, final words. So the Rebbe says this now on a more spiritual level. Look at these words now. Lo yitochem leim, that it refuses to accept. You cannot say shektushosei tifka, that all of a sudden the ger's holiness becomes blemished because there's a Beis Hamikdash. Should leave the Beis Hamikdash. So Mashiach comes. Oh, and all of a sudden the ger is now somehow compromised. Chas v'sholem. Mashiach's coming. That doesn't detract. It's going to add. So the the convert is 100% Jewish. So much so, it's a gewaldige, give a tremendous insight of the Rebbe. When the Beis Hamikdash is built today, Mashiach comes, no problem. Nothing. Bring your korban.
Just like you also carry on Shabbos. Just like the tree on Shabbos. You're allowed to use, even though you can't use the tree, but you're allowed to 100%.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Same principle. So that's the halacha. Now we're going to explain on a spiritual level. On the spiritual level, you need to understand why. What's the reason? What's the reason for what? What's the reason that the conversion, the circumcision and the immersion and the acceptance of, they are what enters. And the korban is not what brings you into the covenant. It's just the key you need to be able to bring korbanos. Why is that not integral? Why is only the Jews went through three things. And the Rabbi explains in the words of the Rambam, it's not that the three things that brought them in. It's with three things they went in. Two brought them, one removed the barrier. But why is the third one only that? Why is the third one not integral to the conversion process? And therefore, why is conversion still 100% today, even without the korban? Why is it of a different category? That we're going to explain, God willing, next week. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining, folks. See you all again, God willing, at 10:15.
Thank you.
Enjoy and regards. Up.